Did they just get married? That doesn't mean much yet. It's essential to ensure that the marriage is consummated. In the Middle Ages, without this, the union could be annulled, which is why witnesses were gathered around the bed, just in case. This was known as the ceremony of lying together. At least symbolically, the bride was expected to spend a few minutes side by side with someone representing the groom. The process was organized like this. If the bride lived, for example, in Spain, and her future husband was in another kingdom, she would be laid in bed in front of a considerable crowd. The more witnesses, the better, to ensure that no one could dispute the union. A representative from the other realm was allowed to lie beside her briefly, at most to touch the bride. This procedure was endured by Henry VIII's sister, Mary Tudor, in the first half of the 16th century. After her lying together with the French ambassador, Mary's union was considered valid and complete. Even if the bride never saw her husband, she would still retain her status as a married woman. People of that time resorted to this trick for a very practical reason. They were suddenly mortal. Young and seemingly healthy individuals could unexpectedly pass away, just like the daughter of King Charles IV, known as the Beautiful. The girl was so close to becoming the wife of an English prince. Alliances were meant to last for decades and were designed to secure important political ties for the kingdoms involved. Let's not forget about the gifts. If the bride didn't marry in time but had already received presents from her future husband, who would they belong to? The lying together ceremony was meant to guarantee answers to these questions. If the princess was truly married, then the gifts belonged to her. But if there were no witnesses at the bed, the marriage wouldn't be recognized. There were also instances where brides were kidnapped. Once, at the end of the 12th century, a beautiful daughter of the Count of Geneva was intercepted on her way to her future husband by a young and enterprising rival. Had the lying together ceremony been conducted and witnesses placed at the bed, the audacious young man would have had no success. Kidnapping an unmarried woman was universally condemned, but taking someone else's wife could cost you your head. In the mid-17th century, King Charles I of England was marrying off his daughter Mary. She had just turned 10, but the king desperately needed military support. A revolution was on the horizon in the kingdom. Frederick Henry of Orange was to assist his father-in-law if necessary. However, the princess was young and was supposed to remain with her parents until she turned 12. What if something happened to Mary? What about the agreements? So, King Charles took this step. In the presence of dozens of courtiers, he escorted his daughter to the bed where the young prince awaited her. The newlyweds lay together on the coverlet for half an hour, then exchanged farewells. However, this meant they were truly husband and wife. The formalities had been observed. Thus, the Prince of Orange had no choice but to assist the King of England when he asked for it. The parties involved were keen to avoid losing mutual benefits if the bride could not be preserved. Philippa of Hainaut was set to marry the King of England, even though he was not present, as chronicled. She was married by a valid proxy granted by the king. Then, the bride was brought to England, and lavish feasts were held daily, too grand to describe. But before Philippa embarked on her journey, it was necessary to ensure that everything was done according to the law. She was to undergo the same ceremony as Mary Tudor, centuries later. However, while Mary and the French ambassador were allowed to touch each other with the tips of their toes, Philippa of Hainaut only needed to brush sleeves of her dress. The witnesses nodded in approval, always in accordance with the rules. Sometimes, older ladies or relatives were left near the young couple. Curtains were drawn around the bed, and the witnesses waited for the marriage to be consummated. It was crucial to ensure that the union was confirmed not just by vows. They were also there to assist if needed. There were times when the bride or groom became overwhelmed with nerves. In such cases, drinks were provided to bolster their courage. The shyness of the newlyweds was sometimes respected, allowing them privacy, but this didn't always work in their favor. For instance, when the fragile Prince Arthur, son of Henry VII, married the Infanta Catherine of Aragon, they were wed. Then the lying together ceremony was conducted, and they were left alone. Soon after, Arthur died, and his young widow claimed that nothing had happened between them. Who could refute her? There were no witnesses positioned by the bed. The outcome is well known. Henry VIII married his brother's widow and later divorced her. He justified this by claiming that Catherine had indeed become Arthur's true wife. Had they addressed this issue properly from the start, the fates of Catherine and her daughter might have turned out very differently. A person in the Middle Ages was bound by many obligations, especially if they belonged to the nobility. Making choices for oneself was nearly impossible. The interests of family and kingdom came first. For less than a century, crowned youth were able to choose their partners based on personal preference. For them, such ceremonies and witnesses at the bed were no longer necessary.